to that. Then the second thing is you said written 60 years after Jesus. That's completely false. The earliest manuscript, talking about the Bible, the earliest manuscripts of the New Testament that you have is nearly 400 years after Jesus. Is the Codex Sinaiticus?
Is the Gospels like John? The earliest Gospel is 64 AD.
No, you're talking about you guys. I'm going to answer you guys. Three people. Okay, look. So what you guys say, it is the claim of when they were written. There is a difference between I claim this was written 65 AD and the carbon dated manuscripts that I have, the earliest traces back to 65 AD. You know the difference between the two now. So I can claim the Quran was written 10,000 years before. Unless I have something carbon dated from the time, I'm just making a claim. Now what Christians do is that they claim, last thing, what Christians do, they claim that Mark was written 60 years after Jesus and all of that. It's claims. When we look at carbon dated manuscripts, there's nothing from the 1st century. 2nd century, you have the P52, which is a card this small, right? You have from the 4th century, the first earliest manuscripts. It's called the Codex Sinaiticus. That's the name of the manuscripts. It's the earliest you have, right? So the earliest you have is 400 years later, written by unknown people in Koine Greek, not the language that Jesus was speaking. If you look at the Old Testament, it's even far worse because it's more than 2,000 years after Moses. The DC Scrolls, which people talk about all the time, it's more than 2,000 years separate from Moses, written by a heretic group that even the Jewish people don't accept. So if you speak to any Jewish person, they'll tell you don't accept the DC Scrolls.
You can't find the original manuscripts if the way it's written is...
No, I was correcting you. You were saying 60 years.
No, that's fine, but that's from, let's say, from my understanding, I haven't looked into it how you say, if someone's writing as if it's happening, let's say, and then this happened, and let's say in the Gospels where they describe the resurrection, for argument's sake, that's all based, and historians agree that, for argument's sake, that happened, and the way they're written it is based on the historical events that happened. Perhaps the actual manuscript that we've managed to then is only 400 AD after. That doesn't mean that you can say that that wasn't written at that time.
There's lots of people that report that at the time they were there when Jesus did all these. And also about carbon dating, there's a lot of like suspicion about carbon dating as an accurate source of timing events, and people say that carbon dating largely is a lot of which kind of incorrect.
Yeah, which credible scientists they say carbon dating is not?
I've just
it's used
after like X amount of time, or like not.
No. It all depends on the type of carbon, the carbon dating, the type of parchment, the type of ink.
It doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, no, it does make a difference.
Just because you don't have a manuscript from that exact time doesn't necessarily mean that there's not one before the most recent one that you found, especially if it's written in the context of that exact time.
What you guys are just doing is that you're claiming there could be something. That doesn't mean anything, right? If I claim, look, this is so far claims, unless you provide evidences of something written earlier.
Unless there's dated evidence, then it didn't happen.
No.
It's not necessarily true.
No, I'm saying when you claim Jesus said this or this happened in this specific time, where is your evidence for that? To bring something, the earliest you have is 400 years later, and then you say, that's actually accurately representing what happened, written by unknown people. We don't accept that. That's how history works. You need to provide evidences for your claims. You cannot just make a claim and say, historically X, Y, and Z happened, but you know what? I don't have evidence, but there could be evidence that you've not found it today. What do you disagree with?
I disagree with that because the majority of historians agree in the around Jesus and when he was born from first-hand witnesses.
Which majority of what? Who are you talking about? Name one.
Well, I don't know the names of the historians.
So you just said majority of historians.
Correct.
Which textual criticism scholars have you read on this issue?
No one in terms of the actual name.
Okay, so I'll give you some recommendation. Read what Bart Ehrman says, for example, who used to be Christian and he left Christian. He says the same thing I'm telling you.
Of course, if you find a Christian that's left Christian.
No. That's one example. I'm just starting with one, right? So that's one example. You can read Bruce Metzger, who died as a Christian, and he is a conservative Christian, and he wrote a book about the corruption of the Bible. It's called Text of the New Testament. It's transmission, corruption, and restoration. He believes it was restored, but it's irrelevant because he shows you the historical framework. In textual criticism scholarship, Christian textual criticism says this is not a controversial thing. Only the laymen don't know these things, the people who don't read. If you read, you realize that they will tell you the same thing I'm telling you. We do not know the sources. They say there's a source called Q. There's a source called that the writers of the Codex Sinaiticus copied from that we don't have today, that we don't know. So they were copying from different sources. So you see what's happening between Matthew and Mark. But look, I don't want to go into too much details of these ideas. Look,
do you believe that Matthew, Mark, do you believe that they didn't exist around the same time as Jesus, or do you think it was hundreds of years after?
Look. I believe Jesus had disciples, but what I believe is based on the Quran. It's a different story, right? I believe Jesus had disciples, and those disciples were following Jesus and this and that. My problem is when you say Jesus said this or his disciples said that. When you look, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, these names were added later on historically. If you open the gospel itself, it doesn't say, my name is Matthew, I'm writing this, my name is Mark.
But doesn't John say that he saw these things of Jesus? And
no, in fact, the gospel,
90 AD.
No, no,
According to the Bible.
No, the Gospel of John itself, towards the end, if you read,
90 AD, right?
yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Look, these are all claims. Like, we're saying we estimate maybe.
You're saying there's no evidence.
Yeah, they're saying we estimate maybe it was written around this time frame. Right? That's what they say. But if you read the Gospel itself, towards the end itself, the Gospel of John, they say this is the testimony of the beloved disciple, and we know his testimony is true. Who's speaking there? Who's we? Who's this group of people writing? No one knows this. This is just written by unknown random individuals, right?
Fine.
The thing is, people today are just accepting these things wholesale. But anyways, let's.
In comparison to the Quran, then, because that was written by, well, essentially, it was written by Allah, but that was.
We'll come to the Quran. No, it's not written by Allah. But we'll come to the Quran. First, I want to deal with the second point, because this was your first point, right? Yeah. Second point is the idea of the Trinity in the Bible. I've read the Bible from beginning to end. You're welcome to show me the Trinity.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't be more educated than you are on the Bible, more than likely, because I'm just starting. I wouldn't.